Hello and welcome to Renew, the show about the College of Forest Resources at Mississippi State University. I'm your host, Leslie Berger. The College of Forest Resources at Mississippi State promotes and enables the conservation and management and wise use of our natural resources. Today's show is going to feature the Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Aquaculture, one of the three units within the college. And to represent that unit today, we have Dr. Dana Morin. Dana, welcome to the show.
Happy to be here.
Well, we have a new format today with this COVID pandemic, and actually I want to come back to that a little bit later because we have some ties here in today's topic. But before we get into that, could you just give an overview of your program within the department?
Sure. Yeah, I'm a relatively new professor. In the last year, I've initiated the Carnivore and Population Ecology Lab in the Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Aquaculture. And what I specialize in is how do we monitor and model populations of animals that are really difficult to detect. And they might be difficult to detect because they're cryptic, or they might be difficult to detect because they occur at low densities. But what we're really, the aim is to try to monitor those populations so we can determine if they're at risk of extirpation and what we can do to try to reverse that.
Right. So one of the work projects that you're working on is with an elusive and endangered species. So you've got both things working against you in some cases. The pangolins that are on the continent of Africa. How did you get involved in this in the first place?
So it was actually by invite. It was an accident, but there was a workshop in Cambridge in 2018. So there are 8 species of pangolins that occur across Asia and Africa. And there was a lot of work going into it because they just recently figured out that they were really starting to disappear from their ranges. And so there was this kind of critical moment where everybody realized that they needed to do something to try to figure out how can we stop the extirpation of pangolins. And so they organized a workshop in Cambridge in 2018, and they invited a bunch of amazing people who were all doing research on pangolins across the world. And I somehow got invited as the population ecologist to come help guide them and build some capacity. So it was really fortunate. It was incredibly inspiring to see these people working and dedicating themselves so hard to conservation of these species. And it was a great experience to really get to build a network and figure out how we can work and move more efficiently towards pangolin conservation.
So why did pangolins even come to the attention of this group in the first place?
So pangolins traditionally used to be fairly widespread in their range, and they are also commonly used in as bushmeat, so for sources of protein in a lot of areas where they occur, but also in Eastern medicine. So and in particular, their scales are highly valued. Their scales are keratin. It's the same as my fingernails, and but they're commonly included in kind of like the recipes of Eastern medicine. And so they started disappearing at really alarming rates. And at that point, they were moved to CITES Appendix 1 back in 2017, and the IUCN identified forming a strategic plan for monitoring as a priority for how we can start facilitating conservation.
Right, so that's where your expertise comes into play then, because there is a need to be able to identify ways to monitor a species that often lives in places where it's difficult to access, they're not sighted very often or with your eyes, and then and they're disappearing, so they're in low densities. So that you mentioned something about them being used as bushmeat, a source of protein for people that might not have other options, and then also in what is believed to be medicinal purposes. This kind of idea was brought to mind recently, or maybe even brought to people's attention for the first time ever. Because of the COVID-19 situation, pangolins all of a sudden was a word that you heard real anchors, using on the news as a potential link to the COVID-19. So could you provide just a brief overview of why that was even being talked about?
Yeah, so I mean, many previous outbreaks have been linked to the illegal wildlife trade, so unregulated trade of wildlife. For example, civets were found to be the intermediate host for the SARS outbreak previously, and so when when the outbreak initially occurred in Wuhan, there were some efforts to try to look at the current metagenomic structure of the SARS-CoV-2 virus, and then to match it to potential intermediate hosts within that would have been potentially present at the market. And when they did that, they had some samples from some Malayan pangolins. And so when they ran that sequencing, they came up to be about 88 to 92% match, which isn't a smoking gun by any means, but it certainly doesn't rule them out as a possible host.
So we have about just maybe 30 seconds left here, but what are the implications for this kind of notoriety for conservation of this species?
We don't know yet. So it's a double-edged sword. People are now aware of pangolins and the dangers of the illegal wildlife trade, but at the same time, we're worried about the motivations of having a species that's related to a global pandemic and what that does for public support.
Right. Well, that's very fascinating work and obviously very timely. So I appreciate you taking your time out to tell us a little bit more about what that means and really in Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Aquaculture's role in trying to solve some of these problems that have implications beyond just the conservation of a species group, which is also important in and of itself. Absolutely. So thank you, and I appreciate your work. I enjoyed visiting with you, and I'll see you back on campus.
Thank you.
We'll be back in just a moment after a break.
Want a career as big as the outdoors? Want to have an impact on the environment? The College of Forest Resources at Mississippi State University delivers hands-on training, ensuring clean air and water, wildlife habitats, and a sustainable environment. Creating new wood products and retooling old ones for today and tomorrow. Find a career in whatever path you choose. Majors in forestry, natural resource and environmental conservation, sustainable bioproducts, wildlife, fisheries, and aquaculture. Want a career as big as the outdoors? Choose the College of Forest Resources at Mississippi State University.
Hello and welcome back to Renew, the show about the College of Forest Resources at Mississippi State University. We've been learning about the Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Aquaculture at Mississippi State, and we just visited with Dr. Dana Morin. Joining me now is her master's student, Ichu Goodwill Ichu, and he's going to be talking to us a little bit about his project. So welcome to the show, Ichu.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to talking about pangolins.
Good, I know. This is a subject that you're very passionate about, and I've heard you speak before, so I'm excited to share your story with others. Tell us a little bit about your path to Mississippi.
Okay, actually, I studied environmental science in my country. So when I graduated, I was looking for an opportunity to start a professional career. And by then, I actually understood that pangolins were like the most trafficked wild mammals, despite the fact that they are very extraordinary species. They are the only scaly mammals in the world. So I had the opportunity to join a team that was brought together by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the Zoological Society of London. So they train early career conservation professionals to work on pangolin conservation in Central Africa. So I was part of the field assessment team. So we were developing methods to monitor pangolins in the wild. So when the position in Mississippi was launched, I actually applied because I wanted to improve my knowledge on developing these ecological monitoring methods, which currently don't really exist.
Right. So Dr. Morin was telling us a little bit about the challenges that are faced when you're trying to deal with an animal that was already elusive, and then you add the fact that the numbers of the animals are declining because of the illegal wildlife trade, and it makes it very challenging. What are some of the other challenges, or the other challenges you face in working in this environment beyond just the fact that your animals don't want to be counted?
I think the first thing is pangolins, as we are talking about methods, the methods for monitoring them, they're really difficult because the methods that are commonly used for other species, they don't actually work for pangolins. So the first thing we have to do is to try to develop this method and actually use them now to find out what the population of pangolins in the wild would be. So in addition to maybe most of the things that Dr. Morin has said, I can just say access to like train staff is difficult, access to finance is difficult for us to conduct our work. So in addition to the fact that it's difficult to actually monitor them in the wild, so it's quite challenging. But I think recently there are many people who are becoming more interested in working on pangolin conservation, and I think we are making progress.
So I heard you speak on campus, and you were telling us about some of the initiatives that were being put in place in your home country and some other countries that have this species. So what are local efforts that people are doing to try to save these animals?
Okay, so in Cameroon and many countries in Central Africa or Sub-Saharan Africa, pangolin is considered a delicacy, and it's one of the most preferred bushmeat species that is eaten locally. So it's quite difficult if you want to try to change behavior. But what we do, we have started efforts working with the local communities to let them understand the importance of protecting pangolins and other wildlife species. And we are also trying to discourage the trade, which we think is having a lot of pressure on pangolins. So we're not just discouraging like local consumption, we place more of the effort on like urban trade in pangolin species, because in urban cities we know that inhabitants in urban cities, they have alternative protein sources. So bushmeat or white meat is not like a very necessary in urban cities. So we're organizing events sometimes to celebrate activities like World Pangolin Day. We try to work with combine education and entertainment to bring the local communities on board.
Right. Well, that sounds like it's very important, and it's very easy to sit here in the United States and say, just tell them not to eat pangolins. But that's very easy because we can go to Kroger and pick up some food pretty easily. But when you're talking about that as that's food, and it's arrogant for us to say don't eat. So, but you have to balance that with the conservation of species, and then what we learned about earlier with Dr. Morin, disease concerns. So it sounds like very important work, and I admire you for your courage to come to this country from Cameroon that's so far from everything you know, to work to educate yourself to be able to go back and do conservation on the ground in your home country. So I wish you the very best, and we'll be in touch. So for the rest of you, I hope you've enjoyed learning a little bit about the Department of Wildlife Fisheries and aquaculture at Mississippi State, and particularly our efforts involving in endangered species conservation. I hope that you'll join us again in the future. I've been your host, Leslie Berger.